The year is 2019, and just like everyone else, I was thrilled for the release of the new Little Women adaptation. Having held the 1994 version close to my heart and being an instant fan of director Greta Gerwig after her incredible work on Lady Bird, I could not contain my excitement. Not to mention, I love Saoirse and Timothy's not too shabby. Although I do have to admit, I was a little hesitant and a little skeptical because what could be done that hasn't already been done, right? Wrong. Her refreshing take on the story, the stellar performances, and the exceptional writing made it such an enjoyable experience and just totally solidified Greta Gerwig as one of the best directors of our generation. She was able to make a film that has been adapted and beloved for many generations, simultaneously new and familiar, which is just props to her. But if you're a little like me, you loved the movie, but there was just something a little off. Something about it made you feel weird, unsettled. I'm not the best with synonyms, but something about it, was just gnawing at you. But you brush it off to the side and you're just like, you know what? This was a great movie. Done. And 4 years passes and you decide to rewatch Greta Gerwig's Little Women. And again, you love it. But there's something that persistent weird feeling is just gnawing at you and you're wondering what it is. So if you're anything like me, you rewatched the 1994 version of Little Women right after watching Greta Gerwig's version. You do a big deep dive into the whole story about Louisa May Alcott and ending revisions and this and that, and you're left with a lot more on your plate than you had desired for, but you get to the bottom of it. And I'm here to share with you what it was about Greta Gerwig's Little Women that just leaves you feeling a little unsettled and a little unfinished. But first off, hi, this is Silver Screen Freak. In case you don't know who I am, I talk about all things movies, TV shows, anime, and pop culture. If any of those things interest you, you might want to hit that subscribe button. You might want to hit that notification bell. Anyways, let's get back into it. So first off, I want to say I really love both versions, 1994 and 2019. But with that said, there's just something totally different about it, even though it's the same characters, same story. It's just two very different movies. I feel like you can't really compare it. It's almost like apples and oranges, which is really weird to say. The following are the key differences between both films. I'm not going to go through all the differences because there is enough content already that has really fleshed out all the differences, not just between these two movies, but between all of the Little Women adaptations and comparing it to the book. So there's really no need for me to do that here. I'm just going to talk about the big key differences I felt that just made these movies completely different stories. So first up, the 1994 version followed a linear narrative, while Gerwig's 2019 adaptation employed a series of flashbacks. I think what Greta Gerwig was able to do was highly commendable with her masterful use of parallel storytelling. The contrast between the warm golden hues of the past and the cool blue tones of the present really created a great sense of nostalgia, a great picture of nostalgia that we could visually see. The longing for childhood that seeped through Jo's character was really palpable, and the shot-by-shot parallel of Beth's sickness and death was particularly striking and devastating. However, with that said, my own personal preference is I liked the linear storytelling much more. I found it more appealing. I felt like I was able to grow up with the March sisters, experiencing their childhood and coming into their womanhood and the passage of time alongside them. And because of this, I felt like the nostalgic component was a lot more potent in the 1994 version, especially in the scene where Jo comes back home and she has a series of flashbacks and all these dialogues from the first half of the movie comes pouring in and pulls on the heartstrings. And I really feel like it was able to really pull on this nostalgic component a lot more than 2019 version could. Secondly, one thing that really stood out as a missing component for me in the 2019 version was this really cozy atmosphere that the 94 version had. I really feel like one of the things that makes the 1994 version so beloved is how cozy the film was. I think it was the use of Christmas songs, the film score, the fact that it was shot on film, a mix of all these elements that really made the film a lot more charming and cozy and warm, and it resonated deeply with the audience. And it was missing in the 2019 version. It wasn't as present or as cozy. Although I do have to say, I think it was a choice by Greta Gerwig, because as I explain later on, a main reason why the movies are so different is because of Greta Gerwig's message and vision, how she brings about this very different understanding of the book. I think I think a lot of people were missing it from her version. Third huge difference are the characters themselves. I think Winona Ryder did a wonderful job being Jo. Her Jo is iconic with the material that was given to her. However, Saoirse Ronan's Jo just has so many more layers and complexities. She's so much more raw and honest. She's more a human being to me than Winona Ryder's Jo. Both interpretation of Jo's were lively and charming, and I think they really nailed down the essence of Jo. However, Saoirse's Jo, we explore jealousy, vulnerability, whereas Winona Ryder's Jo is more graceful and understanding, more like a role model. And although admirable, her depiction just lacks the full roundedness of a person. I feel like a prime example of this is Jo's reaction to Laurie and Amy's marriage. Winona's Jo handles it with grace. She's like a depiction of a person that we wish we could aspire to be, that graceful and, well put together and handled. Whereas Saoirse's Jo delivers the most gut-wrenching speech about regrets and fear and exposing her loneliness and the pain she feels. Just thinking about it, I got goosebumps. It was an incredibly raw and real portrayal that just leaves a lasting impact. And for that, Greta Gerwig's version has the advantage. That Jo is just unmatched. Another standout character difference lies with Amy. So in both versions, she's outspoken, she knows what she wants, she's aware of the limitations that society imposes on her as a woman and knows how to navigate the game. However, again, just like Jo's character in Greta Gerwig's version, Florence Pugh's Amy brings a whole new level of depth to her character. Her unapologetic, practical, and logical approach makes it really hard to hate or blame her. She's simply a woman trying to survive in a world that often undervalues her. And it's yes, girl, go get it. Get that bag. It sucks to be Jo, but we understand you, Amy. And I think something about that didn't rub me the right way. It was actually way better, surface level is way better to just instantly hate Amy, in the 1994 version, and just be oh, she's terrible. She just wants money. And Jo's the more admirable character because she chooses love and herself and stuff. It's harder to wrestle with the idea that Amy could be good. If she was the main character, we would be on her side too. It's a harder pill to swallow. I understand Amy more in the 2019 version, but it was way easier just to hate her in the 1994 version. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is the big thing about Greta Gerwig's version that makes it so hard to swallow it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me get to the last point, which further explains this. So one of the main things was the endings. In the traditional narrative, Jo ends up with Professor Friedrich Brer in both the book and previous adaptations. However, Gerwig's meta approach blurs the line between Jo as a character and Louisa May Alcott as the author. The film questions the romantic ending and suggests that Jo doesn't actually end up with Brer, leaving it open to interpretation. It's quite obvious that she doesn't end up with Brer in reality, but for the sake of her book, she does. And here's where things get interesting. The biggest difference that made me contemplate and makes the 2019 version all around quite hard to swallow, it's the contrasting portrayal of women's lives and choices. Now, it sounds really broad, but it's really not. I'll explain. In the 1994 version, everything wraps up neatly. The film carries a more idealistic, almost childlike message that love is the ultimate goal, triumphing over money and security. Meg finds happiness with Mr. Brooke. Amy chooses Laurie over Friedrich. Marmee explicitly even states that she'd rather her children marry for love and be poor than be rich without it. Jo also chooses Friedrich, leading us to believe that her refusal of Laurie's proposal was solely because she did not love Laurie like that, whereas her love for Friedrich was genuine. It's a lot more simple message. Love triumphs all. And again, how I said, it was easier just to hate Amy. It was just easier to digest. The the 1994 version because it's almost like a fairy tale. The women all get their happy ending. Everyone is happy, and that's it. That's the end. In contrast, Gerwig's 2019 adaptation challenges this black and white perspective. It's a lot more real, it's a lot more raw, which makes it harder to watch because it's a reflection of life in itself. It's like someone holding up a mirror and being like, this is not all rainbows and butterflies. There's a lot of unhappiness underlying everything, and the women don't get everything that they want. What is most refreshing about Gerwig's version is she diminishes the holier-than-thou self-righteousness of marrying for love and unmasks the reality that getting to marry for love is actually a privilege very few people are granted. As refreshing as it is, it's also sad. The fairy tale bubble has burst. What makes the whole thing the saddest is that in the 94 version, the women get to have it all. They get to be great and happy and in love. And in Greta's version, there is an awareness of the limitations of being a woman in this society. They don't get to have it all. There is a choice to be made with something being sacrificed. Amy gets Laurie but abandons her art. Meg gets Mr. Brooks but has to deal with financial burdens. Jo gets freedom and gets to be an author, but ends the film alone. And, it could have been cushioned and la-di-da'd off if Jo were some superhuman woman who was totally happy being independent. But she's not. She's human, and totally human for saying that she's lonely and that she's afraid of being alone. And this is what I've been wrestling with since watching Greta's Little Women. It is actually one of the most depressing things I've ever seen. It's hard, raw, very real, very beautiful. So yeah, it's a pretty depressing ending, but after looking into it, I believe it was Greta's way in truly honoring the story Louisa May Alcott had intentioned for. And thereby the whole message of Greta's version is vastly different from its predecessor. The previous variation of Little Women shows a fairy tale, as I've said again and again. It's a fairy tale about women who can have it all and women who want love. They want to love and be loved in return. However, Louisa May Alcott had different ideas. When Little Women first came out, Louisa would receive a lot of letters practically begging Laurie to end up with Jo, and a lot of inquiries about who the other women would marry. In a letter she wrote to a friend, she writes, "Girls write to ask who the little women will marry as if that was the only end and aim of a woman's life. But I won't marry Jo to Laurie to please anyone." She had originally intended for Jo to end up with no one, but like the movie shows, she had a publisher who insisted that Jo needs to marry in order to sell books. And so, although she really did not want to, she wrote to a friend saying that she had concocted a solution out of perversity. Basically, she decided to prank everyone by creating the most dull, unattractive, and dictatorial Friedrich Bear as a funny match for Jo. And we all know Laurie she disposed of by marrying him off to Amy, who I think everyone can agree with was the most unlikable character from the whole book. And therein lies, I think, the main point of Little Women. Number one being that it's an unfair world for women and society and how it's built up for women and their role and their place in the world, that marriage should be an economic proposition for them. This is how the world works, so this is how the women must play. And two, I think it all encompasses that life is just so much better when it's just women. That could be backed up with just how lovingly depicted Jo's childhood is when it's just her and her sisters. Like, not even her dad is in the picture. They're in the midst of war. They hardly have any money, but their childhood is just so idyllic and cozy and warm and happy compared to how bleak and dry their adulthood is. We've seen time and time again throughout the movie that Jo is completely against her family leaving the nest. She's upset with Meg for getting married, first of all. She calls it the end of childhood. As Lara Langer Cohen wrote, Jo is angry above all because she gets the bitter tragedy of Little Women as no one else in the novel does. It tells a story about the bonds that knit together a family of women, of love nurtured with exquisite care, only to break up that family and transfer its bonds to an array of frankly disappointing men. And I think that's just the point of what Louisa May Alcott wants to say. The world would be so much off better if women could just do their own thing, be independent, not have to rely on a man, But, the 1800s had a different plan. And so because the world is like that, she rebelled and made her book like that as well. I think every variation of Little Women since the book came out, they couldn't come to terms with why Louisa May Alcott would make such a weird ending for her characters. For Jo to be with someone so dull, and for Laurie to be with Amy, and for Meg to be with Mr. Brooks, who can't provide for her, nor does he even really respect her, and Marmee to be with her husband, who's basically MIA for the whole story. So other variations would try and compensate by making Mr. Bear seem a little bit more attractive, making Laurie's character, more perfect, just trying to soften these reasonings, whereas Greta Gerwig is like, no, this is what she meant when she wrote this book, and I'm gonna honor how Louisa May Alcott saw the world. So I'm not saying that Greta's version is worse or 94 version is worse. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying 94 was a fairy tale. It ends off on a very happy note, and as happy as Greta's version seems to be, it's actually not. Yeah, food for thought. So anyways, I'm gonna end it off here. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought of both movies, and give this video a like if you liked it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to, and give me any recommendations for any other movies, topics, or TV shows I should talk about. I'll see you next time. Bye!